Our next topic is the immune system. And so here we're going to do first sort of an overview of how the immune system works. We're going to take a look at pathogens and how they affect the human body, how your body responds, so the immune response. We're going to also take a look at the parts of the immune system, so the anatomy, and then how your immune system actually then works, so the physiology of it. We do have an innate immunity. That means just by virtue of being a human being, you have some sort of a resistance against pathogens. It's a non-specific response, and innate means that you're born with it. Then as you go through life, you're going to acquire immunity to pathogens. So you get exposed to pathogens, to viruses, bacteria, and other pathogens, and then your immune system learns to defeat those pathogens that are trying to make you sick. And so that will be acquired immunity, and that is individual depending on what you as a person are being exposed to. We're going to take a look at the immune response pathways and then neuroendocrine immune reactions. That will be at the end. So first, here our overview of the immune system, and I would just try to sort of paint a picture in your mind of how the immune system works. Think of it as a three-tier system, kind of we had the 3 tiers of the endocrine system, but here it's slightly different. It's sort of picture how you would defend yourself. If you have a nice big house and you don't want any robbers to come in to take your stuff, what would you do? Well, first thing you're going to do is you're going to have some sort of a fencing, maybe a security camera. Maybe you live in a gated community and you have a gatekeeper there, some sort of a physical barrier. Well, that's what your body does too. It has physical barriers such as unbroken skin, secretions on that skin, stomach acidity, things like that. Next, well, if let's say somebody does break through your physical barrier, so they jumped the fence or they somehow got around the security camera and now they are coming in, what would you do if you wanted somebody to prevent from coming in to your house and take your stuff? Well, first you're gonna go with sort of non-specific, something. You start throwing something. Maybe, I don't know, throw some dishes or try to defend yourself, preventing this person from, or this whatever wants to come in that you don't want in your house from coming in. So that would be a second line of defense. And the second line of defense, the human body has quite a few options. We have macrophages, we have neutrophils, we have the inflammatory system, so inflammation. We also have the complement system. So there's a variety of different things that we can use in the second line of defense. And we will get to that throughout this lecture. So just don't get lost in that second line of defense because there are so many different things. The first line of defense, of course, very easy. The physical barriers, that's pretty intuitive. Now, the third line of defense is also relatively easy because that just revolves around the lymphocytes. So lymphocytes, they can differentiate into B cells and T cells, with B cells making antibodies, and T cells, they are responsible for cell-mediated immune functions. And so they mount very specific immune responses that we then call third line of defense. That is basically when the robbers are in your house, they have basically broken all your barriers, they are roaming around everywhere, and now you need to start thinking. You have to make a strategy, have to figure out what are the strengths and the weaknesses of your enemy and how to defeat the enemy. And that's basically what your immune system does too. It starts to sit down and think which different types of cells will be most suited to defeat this pathogen. Do I need to make an antibody? Do I need to come in with killer T cells or some other T cells? So there are different options there. But just to come back sort of to this overview of the immune functions. First line of defense is easy. Those are physical barriers. Third line of defense revolves entirely around the lymphocytes. And so B cells and T cells. Now the second line of defense is everything else. So when in question, when in doubt, if it's second line of defense, ask yourself, does it involve lymphocytes? If it does, it's third line of defense. Does it involve physical barriers? If it does, first line of defense. Everything else, second line of defense. Okay, so now back here to the slide. The human immune system consists of, there's some lymphoid tissues, we have these immune system cells, and then chemicals, interleukins, for example, that coordinate and communicate between these white blood cells and then execute any kind of responses. Okay. Now, one of the biggest things about the immune system is that you have a very powerful system here, but you don't want to aim your weapons against yourself. So it is very important for your immune system to learn what it should attack and what it should not attack. And that's not so simple. You might think, well, bacteria are really different from my own cells, so maybe, yes. But then you have a normal microbiota that you're working with and that you're friends with that you don't want to be have destroyed. So how about that? You don't want your immune system to go after every E. coli that's in your gastrointestinal system. That would be not good. So the question is, how do we teach our immune system what it should go after and what it shouldn't go after? And so it's really not so simple. It involves to recognize and remove abnormal cells, and that would be involving even self cells. That means, let's say you have cancerous cells in your body, and you would like your immune system to destroy these cancer cells. Well, how do you tell your immune system that, hey, go after these cancer cells, they're no good, I don't want them, but they are still your cells? So even abnormal self cells need to be recognized by your immune system and then destroyed, hopefully. We also, that's relatively easy, we need to remove dead or damaged cells. That is something that your immune system is pretty good at, and it's not that difficult to do. We need to protect our body against disease-causing invaders or these pathogens. And so the first thing would be usually to prevent them from coming in. So we're using the first line of defense first, and then if we need to go further, then your immune system will activate sequentially different branches and that it has available. So on the pathogen side, what are we talking about? We have bacteria, we have viruses, fungi. There's some fungi that can cause disease, some protozoa diseases. You might know about some flagellates. There's some amoebas that can make you sick. Also, malaria is a protozoa type of disease. Then we have parasites such as worms, like pinworm infections. And here the last point is immunogens versus antigens. An immunogen is a molecule or substance that causes your immune system to react. An antigen is something that causes your immune system to make an antibody. So antigen is more specific. An antigen is a substance that causes the formation of antibodies. And then immunogen, of course, an immunogen is also an antigen, but an antigen may not be an immunogen. It's maybe splitting hairs here, but I don't know, maybe you got the idea. So an antigen causes the formation of antibodies by your immune system, and an immunogen is a more general term that says that your immune system is reacting to a substance. Okay, so here a little bit more on the immune system overview. There are some problems with the immune system. One or potential problems with the immune system: incorrect responses or autoimmune diseases. They're actually on the rise. It's a pretty big problem. Here's an example given: type 1 diabetes. You may have heard of other autoimmune diseases like lupus or rheumatoid arthritis. There's quite a few of them out there these days, and they're on the rise. Also, your immune system might be a little bit overzealous and overactive, and that's usually known as allergies. That means your immune system is fighting something that really wasn't dangerous, but it's fighting it anyway. Or if you don't have sufficient or no immune responses, then you have an immunodeficiency disease, and I'm sure you all have heard about AIDS. That will be acquired immune deficiency syndrome caused by a virus, the human immunodeficiency virus. So that will be an acquired immunodeficiency. Sometimes people are also born with insufficient immune systems or an immunodeficiency. So that will be then primary immunodeficiency. And here we have our typical bacterium. When we think of infectious disease, most of the time what we think about is bacteria or maybe viruses, especially these days. So here would be a simple bacterium. This one is rod shaped, so it's kind of longer than it's wide. And it has a flagellum for locomotion. And then these bacteria, they're actually pretty simple. They have a circular chromosome, so one circular piece of DNA that's shown right here. Then they have tons and tons of ribosomes for making proteins and to make sure that their metabolism is running. They have a cell wall, and then underneath that cell wall is a cell membrane. Depending on whether they're gram-positive or gram-negative, they have slightly different structures in their cell wall. But that's a typical bacterium. And here would be a viral structure. This one looks kind of like coronavirus. This one is more like a retrovirus, like a flu virus. But anyway, so a virus is not considered a living cell because it can't reproduce on its own. It needs to hijack a host cell and then reprogram the host cell to make more virus particles. So a virus always contains genetic material in its core, and that could be DNA or RNA. So DNA or RNA for genetic material, and then that genetic material is wrapped in some sort of a protein coat, and there may be various layers to it. It may be having spike proteins like this one here. This would be this flu virus that has the H and the N antigens up there. And that's basically what your immune system recognizes, is what sticks up from the surface right here, and it's trying to make antibodies against those surface structures. So when you're developing a vaccine, which is what I'm sure they're doing right now also with the coronavirus, you're looking always at the surface structures because that's what your immune system will recognize. And if you can make antibodies against these surface structures, then you can prevent the disease. So that's how vaccines, like the flu vaccine, every year they're going to give you a mixture of a variety of these spike proteins that they think might be for the coming season. That's the ones that the virus will be using, and then your immune system will make antibodies against these particular structures that are spiking up from the surface of this virus. Anyway, so here is a brief comparison of bacteria and viruses, structural differences. You can just look through that, through this table right here. One thing to point out is that you cannot treat viruses with antibiotics, and that is something you really need to know. For the longest time, antibiotics were completely overused. They were used for viral diseases where they can't do anything, and all it did was give the bacteria a chance to develop resistance, and now we have many antibiotics that don't work anymore. So be careful with the use of antibiotics. Use them when you need them, but for viruses, they will not work, because they limit the growth of cells by limiting cell wall synthesis or interfering with the ribosomes. But for viruses, that strategy would not work. So moving on here, an overview of the immune response. Again, these the three barriers that or three layers of defense that we have that I talked about earlier, the three lines of defense. Number one, physical and chemical barriers. That would be your unbroken skin, mucus, secretions, the acidity in your stomach. Those are all physical or chemical barriers. Next up, the non-specific immune responses. Those would be a second line of defense. There would be your innate immunity, the neutrophils, the macrophages, mast cells, complement, the complement system, and then also inflammation and inflammatory responses. And then we have specific immune responses, and they revolve entirely around lymphocytes. So that would be cell-mediated versus antibody-mediated immunity. And so, of course, all of this is contingent here on lymphocytes. Let me write this down, lymphocytes. Where we have cell-mediated, that would be T lymphocytes. Cell-mediated, let's make the arrow over here, that's T cells. And humoral, that's the old term, most people call it now antibody-mediated, that is B cells. Okay, So cell-mediated would be T cells, and then antibody-mediated immunity via B cells. So your third line of defense, again, that will be lymphocytes that are responsible for taking care of that. Here would be physical and chemical barriers. You can see here a variety. The stomach acidity, that's one. Your unbroken skin, glandular secretions, all of that would count for physical and chemical barriers. So now anytime we have immune response, we have